Alrighty, so today we will be comparing the physiology of a human's nervous system and the nervous system of an octopus. And this topic is actually super interesting. I came to know a lot of things and it's actually super cool. So go ahead and hang tight. First, we'll start by talking about the anatomy of a human's nervous system. And that is separated into two different main systems, really. The central nervous system, which includes your brain and your spinal cord, and then the peripheral nervous system, which is just a network of nerves located on the peripheral parts of the bodies. Within these two systems, there are billions of neurons that make it so that the body can communicate with itself. And these neurons include an axon, um, the dendrites, different things on the neuron there, which allow for it to work and to process electrical signals and chemical synapses. And one of the most important parts of a human's nervous system and the neurons found within is that they have myelinated or myelin sheaths. So when you hear that a neuron is myelinated, it means that they have myelin sheaths around them. And we'll talk about why those are important in a couple of minutes. Um, in regards to the anatomy of the octopus's nervous system, um, an octopus has a partially decentralized nervous system, meaning that the centralized the brain in this case of an octopus is right in between the eyes. This brain doesn't have to control all functions, which is why it's partially decentralized. It still has a central brain system, but it also has eight mini brains or ganglion clusters that are found within each tentacle of the octopus, which can process things themselves. Um, octopuses have about 400 million nerves, and 40 million are in each tentacle, which makes it so that their tentacles can process things in the ways that they need to, independent of the other tentacles. So let's talk about the central nervous system of a human brain and the physiology there. There are three main functions for the central nervous system. First is to receive sensory information. The second is to process that information that it receives. And the third is to respond with a motor output or some other sort of output there. Your central nervous system also controls emotions, thoughts, and memories. And this area is where we can really learn things. This is where we remember these things. And so the central nervous system is highly important to the function of humans. Without it, we wouldn't be able to function in any possible way. The central nervous system uses electrical signals and chemical synapses to accomplish physiological needs. And in the central nervous system, your neurons are relatively short, um, and they are myelinated as well, which allows for the electrical signal to really pass through and stay concentrated along the neuron while chemical process or electrical processes and chemical synapses are occurring, which allow for a more efficient, quick response from the central nervous system. The peripheral nervous system works hand in hand with the central nervous system. There are two different um, parts of the peripheral nervous system, the autonomic system and the somatic system. The autonomic system includes all unconscious processes that are controlled by the nervous system, digestion, some of your reflexes, um, your GI tract, and all forms working, your kidneys working. Many of these things are controlled by your autonomic nervous system, which is part of your peripheral nervous system and goes hand in hand with that central nervous system because the brain ultimately controls it. And then your somatic nervous system controls functions that you manage by thinking about them, talking, um, moving, walking, running, lifting. All of these things are things that your somatic nervous system, which is part of your peripheral nervous system, takes care of. Again, this uses electrical signals and chemical synapses along the neurons to accomplish these physiological needs. Um, In your peripheral nervous system, your neurons tend to be longer, and they still are myelinated to keep that electricity concentrated along the neuron during these processes. Now, octopuses, their nervous system is a little bit different, like we mentioned before. They do have that one central brain, which determines and processes the wants and needs of the octopus. I need food. I want to move this way. I want to do this. I want to do that. I need this. I need that. That's what the central brain determines. And then the eight brains or ganglion clusters, clusters of nerves, located in the tentacles. Um, it each of these brains receives from the central brain what the octopus wants and can process these things separately from other tentacles on how to make that happen. So say the brain wants to move this way but wants food along the way, it'll use one tentacle to do one thing while the other one's doing the other thing. Um, like I said, each brain in the tentacle can make each tentacle do different things without the need of the central brain to process it as well. And so these tentacles can respond to outside stimuli without these things going to the central brain and can respond without need of help from the central brain. Humans, we feel something on our peripheral nervous system. It shoots, say I touch my hand, I can feel it right here. It shoots up my arm, my nerves up through my arm, into my central nervous system, into my spinal cord, up to my brain. My brain processes it and comes back and gives the response out the peripheral nervous system in the matter of milliseconds. Whereas the octopus can feel something on its tentacle, it gets sent up to that ganglion, that nerve cluster in its tentacle, and it can respond straight from there. It doesn't need to go to the central brain. Again, this uses electrical signals and chemical synapses. However, the main difference here is that octopus nerves are unmyelinated and are often monopolar. Um, the big thing about the myelination, the presence of the myelin sheaths, is the fact that things can happen more efficiently. And so oftentimes the response of an octopus is much slower comparative to the response of a human due to the unmyelinated neurons that they have. And the fact that they're monopolar means sometimes their nerves only can do one specific thing, whereas humans, we have nerves that go throughout our body and they can, depending on what our central nervous system wants our body to do, they can do different things depending on that there. I have a little video here that I want to show um, here on YouTube. Let's see if it'll load. I'm not sure as to why it's not loading. Um, Essentially, what was supposed to be shown on that was an octopus that was moving with a couple of its tentacles, picking things up with its other tentacle, and doing a billion different things with all of its tentacles, which is true multitasking because they have those eight separate brains. Whereas humans, we can't truly multitask because everything has to go back into the central nervous system. And so that it was just a video showing that, but I don't know why it didn't work. I apologize. Let's look at a side-by-side comparison of their physiology. Let's talk about the centralization. We already touched on this. Humans' nervous system's highly centralized. We have our brain and spinal cord, but the octopus nervous system is decentralized. It has its brain, but it has its large nerve centers in each arm. In comparison of the neuron count, like I mentioned, humans have billions of neurons, around 86 billion, and most of those are in the nerve. Like I talked about, the neurons in the central nervous system are quite a bit smaller than those that are located in the peripheral nervous system, and that is why the brain needs to be able to function doing a billion different things at once, and so it fits a lot of those in there. Like I said, 400 to 500 million neurons are found in the octopus nervous system, and about two-thirds of them are in the arm. The main roles of the nervous system are pretty similar um, in different ways in the ways that we live. For us, it's important that we have sensory processing, motor control, cognition, homeostasis, and that's your nervous system controls all of those things. Whereas the um, octopus's nervous system is important for also with their motor control, movement control. They learn with it. We know that octopuses are some of the most intelligent creatures on the planet, can learn almost as well and adapt almost as well as humans can. They depend on it for sensory integration, for camouflage, and then for their autonomous arm action, which is pretty cool. Like I said, the signal transmission, the physiology there, electrical signals along the axon, myelinated with the myelin sheaths, and then chemical synapses that interact between the original neuron and the postsynaptic or neuron there. And like it says there, there's rapid conduction, and that's due to those myelin sheaths. Um, as to an octopus, their electrical signals are slower in general, and their chemical synapses, their signal transmission, it is faster in the central brain, but it is still slower than that of a human. As far as integration goes, the sensory information that we as humans receive, like the example I gave before, if you get punched in the arm, it's got to be processed in your brain before you can feel something come back out to your peripheral nervous system. Whereas for an octopus, like we've already talked about, the arms independently process these inputs and organize movements. Just some comparison continued. The muscle control is commanded by the central nervous system via the motor neurons that are integrated into the peripheral nervous system. Whereas for an octopus, arms coordinate their movement locally, and their central brain will get involved if it needs to in complex actions. Reflexes are reflexes like I'm beating a dead horse at this point, but the reflex has to go into the central nervous system and come back out. Um, and then for an octopus, they're independent of the brain. So essentially, we see here one of the main difference for all of them for between a human and an octopus and their nervous systems has to do with the decentralization of the octopus's nervous system, allowing them to have different arms that or different brains within each of their tentacles or arms that can control different things, whereas us humans have our central nervous system where everything has to be processed in the brain and then an output can occur at that point using either using the peripheral nervous system. Everything has to go into that central nervous system. And so you might think which one is more convenient. I personally think a human's nervous system is more convenient. It's got the myelin sheaths along its axons of its neurons, which allows for the process, even though it is centralized, to occur in milliseconds. Whereas because octopuses, um, ganglion in their arms or tentacles aren't myelinated, the process just takes more time and is less efficient as that of a human. Um, some diseases and disorders that can occur in the nervous system, most of them that I found had to do with humans. I didn't find much besides this parasitic infection one that had to do with octopus because their nervous systems just aren't quite as studied that way um, as a humans. And so the main one for the octopuses, they can get some parasitic infections, which will the parasite will attack their nerves, which will end up destroying the organism and then making it so that they can't process information in the way that they need to. Same thing goes for humans, but we have some specific examples with Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, cancer, epilepsy, meningitis is an infection within the spinal cord, within the nervous system there, and then multiple sclerosis. Here we have a diagram of the multiple sclerosis where we see a healthy neuron with its myelinated axon. It's got everything going right, but a nerve affected by multiple sclerosis, its myelin becomes damaged, and the process of which neurons work is therefore not efficient anymore, and the electrical signals sometimes don't reach the next neuron and things like that. And so as a result, we see people with multiple sclerosis, we see their motor functions decrease, sometimes rapidly, sometimes less rapidly. It just depends there. And so nervous system diseases and disorders are super interesting, and they're being highly studied at this point because there are a lot of people affected by them, and they do cause problems there. I will include my works cited on a different page as the assignment requires or recommends, and so I'll get that sent in as well. But yeah, overall, the nervous system between um, octopus and humans is pretty cool. They're very different, but they're both very complex in their own ways comparative to other animals as well. The human nervous system is it's an immaculate system that works incredible. And the octopus's nervous system is super cool also with its separate brains, as we want to call them, those ganglion in their tentacles, which allows for them to do different things at different times, which is super cool there. But overall, their nervous systems are similar in the way that they use electrical signals and chemical synapses to process information and to allow information to make it from one area to the other. But they're very different in the way that they accomplish different things and the way that they're laid out in the anatomy of each of the different organisms. So, yeah.